the idea is to build on each other's ideas. That's what collaboration is.
Yes.
And that requires deep attention and listening, whether it's in person or online in a hybrid environment, or even if it's asynchronous. Mm-hmm. So if it's asynchronous collaboration, and sometimes it has to be because people are on different sides of the planet, how do you apply deep listening if you're not there at the same time? It's coming back to the fundamentals of being curious. What questions can you ask to tease out an understanding of what the other person is proposing and where they're coming from? So it comes back to that fundamental leadership skill applied in a new way, in a different context, which I think will really help tease it out.
Welcome to the People Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the People Powered Solutions podcast. A lot of times when we're sharing and having these amazing conversations with our guests, we realize that this just can't stop here. This is not enough. We need to continue the conversation. When we interviewed Zoë Routh a few months ago, we had that same kind of moment and said, that's it. We need to commit to continuing this conversation. And she was gracious enough to grant us a second interview with her. So thank you for that. We want to talk about today the future of leadership. We have talked about all the changes that have arisen from this post-pandemic. And I'm going to be that eternal optimist and say that we are, in fact, in the post-pandemic phase. And if you don't believe it, then I don't want to hear about it, because I want to wear these rosy colored glasses, because that's just how I roll. But definitely the world of work has changed. I think it was already well in motion in terms of evolution prior to the pandemic, and what the pandemic in fact did was just accelerate an already in motion kind of evolution. So it has changed. That being said, it means that that traditional and the old way of leading folks will no longer work. We've all heard that adage of, if you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you always got. Well, you know what? You can't do what you've always done when it comes to leadership. And so we thought, why not get some insight and some valuable tidbits of strategies and solutions from Zoë Routh relevant to the future of leadership, and how she might provide insight on how to equip yourself as a leader to better navigate the future of work. So welcome, Zoë.
Thanks, Lori. Great to be here again. Very thrilled to be talking about this topic. It's so juicy.
It is so juicy. So let's just launch right in. What has changed specifically when it comes to being a leader within the new world of work?
There's four major shifts that are being navigated, some well and some not so well, by leaders and organizations. The first one you alluded to is the shift in workplaces, and the workplace shift is going from headquarters, where everybody bunks in a physical location, does their work and goes home, to hubs. Headquarters to hubs is one of the big shifts that is happening, and there's lots of resistance to that in some way, and there's lots of people who are embracing it. And it's an interesting one, because there's actually emerging research that shows that engagement is actually better when people are co-located. So bow. And
bow. But is it because our leaders are ill-equipped to manage when they're not co-located, right?
Yes. And that's sort of the adjunct to it. So it's not that it can't work. It's just that we haven't worked out the finesse of creating those human touch points. And that's really what it comes down to. Why is co-location better for engagement? Because it's easier to do those interactions, those human interactions, where you can build up goodwill, you can build up rapport, you can build relationships, you can get to know people. It's just easier. You can do it. You don't even have to plan for it, because it happens naturally as people collide into one another. And so I think that's why some organizations are saying, well, that's easier, let's do that. And if the research is saying it's better, then let's do that. Mm-hmm. Yet the reality is so many of us really prefer a hybrid work arrangement, where you can do some stuff at home and some stuff, it can make sense to come together to collaborate and to do creative work and to see other humans and to get out of the house. There is a huge boost in well-being that can take place, amongst other things, in the hybrid working arrangement. So I was working with an organization this week, and it's the exact same conversation. They've noticed that a decline in engagement, a decline in productivity, a decline in accountability in the hybrid workplace. And it's because people do not necessarily have got the skills or rituals in place in order to harness that arrangement. And as people-based people, we know it's the basics of Management 101, just in a different context. And the basics of Management 101 are, do you know what your purpose is in your role? Do you have role clarity in terms of what you're here to do? Do you have clear outcomes that you're meant to generate? So you're having all this sort of framework around your work. That's the work clarity piece. And then there's the human interaction piece. How are you going about building those touch points in a virtual environment? And I was sitting in this meeting, and one of the participants says, I started out by every fortnight, every 2 weeks, I'm going to call and give feedback to every single one of my direct reports. He has 50 direct reports, which is a lot. And he says, it just became a burden. I didn't want to do it, so I dropped it. I'm like, okay, so that's not working. What else could you do? He's like, nothing. They just need to get on and do their job. I'm like, incorrect. A very task-focused person. We need to do a little bit more relationship building. So I'm like, pull out your phone, send them a text, use the texting, or use your chat interface, your online chat, your team's chat room, so that you can be present and have the banter that way. Organize quick catch-ups. And one of the other participants, it was pretty funny. He goes, well, it used to be easier co-located because you could do these quick touch points in the elevator, and it only takes the 30 seconds of going from the first floor to the fifth floor, and then you're done, you're out. Whereas if you pick up the phone and talk to someone, you might be there for half an hour because all of a sudden they want to connect. Gosh darn it, those people.
Oh, how dare they? How dare they want to connect?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm wondering if you're seeing this too, is that people are needing to fill up their toolkit in terms of how do we build these touch points in this hybrid work environment? I don't think it needs to be hugely technically challenging. What do you think?
I don't think, I'm absolutely seeing that, just because they're not really sure how, or they go into overkill. Like these 50 direct reports and trying to have one-on-one meetings every 2 weeks with 50 different direct reports. Why not? The touch points don't necessarily need to be with you as the leader. What if you facilitated, okay, I'm going to see you all, and then you can kind of stagger it out. What makes sense? What is operationally feasible? Make it manageable so you're more likely to actually maintain it. And if 30-second elevator was what worked for you, figure out how can I achieve that same outcome in our current reality. Leveraging technology will be key. You can absolutely automate some of these things, all the while still being genuine, but using technology to become more effective at staying in touch with your people. Adding comments to some of their stuff that they've posted, liking, saying, great job. You're still interacting with them, even if it's not a dedicated one-on-one. I can see that, that one-on-one with 50 reports, direct reports every 2 weeks is just not even manageable for any leader. So why not instead create these smaller groups and have them and task them with connecting with one another and help them own a piece of that connection, help them own a piece of the responsibility for staying connected, and hold them to these shared commitments, which you'll work with them at establishing. Guys, this is a different environment. This is a new world. Let's come up with some shared commitments, and then hold them accountable to delivering on those shared commitments, and that it not all be on the leader's shoulders.
Yeah, I think that's the shared accountability, and getting everybody to declare what they're committing to is really important. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges is when people say, yeah, I'll do that, and then they don't. Is a perennial leadership challenge, whether it's in remote or co-located environments. And
a regular one for sure. One of the things that one of my groups I worked with, we did these shared commitments, and they said, okay, how are we going to hold each other accountable? What is it going to look like? And then they're like, of course, the more extroverted people are like, I'm just going to call you out on it. Like, if you're not doing it, or if you're doing something that's, contrary to what we've all agreed to, I'm going to tell you about it. And then the more quiet person says, because at this point we've developed in our session, the level of trust for the person to say, I am not really comfortable calling people out. Like, I don't think you can ever expect me to call you out, because that's not where I am in my brain. And so they said, okay, well, what would be helpful? She's like, well, I think I'd be okay with kind of giving a hand gesture. So they're like, okay, so what would the hand gesture look like? And that be on the shot? No, not that kind of a hand gesture. For those listening, we're coming up with some pretty creative hand gestures, like a fist. But absolutely. So they came up with this kind of timeout and just this, but also added the shared commitment that this is not up for negotiation. This just means that whether it was intentional or not, this person is feeling like you're going against some of the stuff that we committed to. So it's your cue to revisit your shared commitments and to replay whatever had just transpired in that situation, and to think about how you might have contravened those initially shared commitments, agreed upon shared commitments. So I thought that was really cool for like the more introverted person to be able to say,
Yeah.
And that
I think that the accountability piece is part of a whole ecosystem. That's sort of like the tail end of, it's kind of a symptom of the entire team culture, really. So if you step it back a little bit and talk about how have you set up the team, and are they free to actually say, hey, I'm behind on this? Or do they have a practice of asking for support? Do they have clarity on the task? All these kind of upstream issues need to be resolved before we go, calling people out in hand gestures. Because if we don't fix that upstream stuff, then it can turn into defensiveness, regardless of whether you have hand signals or not.
Because you won't have the trust required to facilitate that kind of accountability piece of
there may not be trust. They may not have the resourcing or the ability to actually deliver on this, and they haven't had the ability to actually express that. So they could just be floundering, and nobody likes to admit that they're floundering. So you as a leader have to create a whole culture container for the work experience. And these are fundamental leadership skills that are going to be perennial no matter how the workforce is set up.
And so how it evolves. Yeah,
that's right. So the future of leadership is taking a lot of traditional skills, abilities, and processes and applying them in a new context. I think it's an adaptability piece. It's not necessarily a transformational piece. And I think that's probably refreshing for people to know. It's like, I don't have to do a completely new way of things. Like, you take the fundamentals and apply it differently. That's the key shift. So this is one of the big shifts, is this idea of going from headquarters to hubs and all the ramifications for that. One of the other shifts that's changing with the big background trends, which you've been seeing, robotics, AI in particular, and blockchain, is the actual work is changing. And all the conversations about generative AI are bringing this to the fore more obviously. And the work that we're doing, like we've evolved in the last sort of 30 to 40 years into a knowledge-based economy. So the rise of being a knowledge worker, an expert in your field, has been how we progress and focus our career trajectory. And that's changing. And that's changing to, instead of being a knowledge worker, because let's face it, can just go to Google or go to ChatGPT and you get a lot of answers that are really good there. Why do you need the expert? Is to being a creator. And so the work is going from knowledge-based to being a creative thinker. So knowledge to creativity is one of the big shifts. And that can be very intimidating for a lot of people, because that also requires a shift in identity. So if I'm an expert in my field and you're asking me to be a creator instead of an answerer,
instead of a knowledge-based person. It's a completely different role.
And I think this is more challenging for people. It's like, well, how do I become a creative person? And when we say creative, people often think painting, drawing, building imagination.
Houses. I'm not.
And it's less about that and more about being curious and asking better questions. So those are the leadership skills that need to be developed. Is if you focus just on developing better question asking, this will become a gateway to creativity, because our brains like to provide solutions to any question that we answer it. So we get better at asking good questions, then we'll come up with better answers. And so I think that is probably a really practical thing that leaders can start to apply. It's like, how can I ask a better question about this?
Absolutely.
What might be a better question?
Absolutely.
And better questions are like, what if? Let's start with what if and how might we? And I think there's a book called A More Beautiful Question that sort of is a hat tip to that. And I think by starting there is sort of the stepping stone into creativity.
And approaching with curiosity, right? Like that question be rooted in curiosity, but genuine curiosity. Like how might we help me understand? That's a beautiful starting point to enable kind of like this solutions generation from your team members, and don't feel like you have to do all the heavy lifting from a creativity perspective. Asking those curious questions, from what I'm understanding, is in and of itself facilitating and fueling that creativity. But the creativity doesn't necessarily have to stem from you. Ideally, it's a collective thing. It's coming from all of your team members whom you've asked these questions to, right?
That's right. And so this creativity is one of the essential leadership skills for the future. And the other one that you speak to is collaboration. So there's no one brain that has all the solutions, and our ability to ask better questions in a group and come up with collective solutions is absolutely critical for leading into the future, because the world is way too complex. There's far too many things happening. We cannot rely on one perspective alone. So the more perspectives we have at the table that we can harness and leverage and tease out through collaborative and creative processes is going to give us better chance of finding solutions to these emerging problems and intractable, wicked problems as well. So creativity and collaboration are two of the most important leadership skills to hone to be prepared for the future. And the collaboration is quite challenging, actually. There's a lot that needs to be in place for that to work effectively. And it's more than just cooperation, where we come together and like, you're doing this, you're doing that. It's real collaboration is engineering ideas together. And that requires a down regulation of the ego.
I was just about to say, it's absolutely a down regulation of the ego and a shift away from your personal interests towards the collective interests, the collective objectives of the group, as opposed to what's in it for me, right? Because that's a voice that's there loud and clear pretty much since the day we're born. What's in it for me to some extent. So to really be able to self-regulate and to say the focus here is on the end product, the collective outcome, the collective objective of our whatever planning process you're trying to do. And that's got to be paramount and at the forefront of all our decision making and all of our brainstorming, idea generation. It really needs to be at the forefront of it.
There's a great book called Group Genius. I think it's called Group Genius. And it talks about how to get a team to work collaboratively in flow. And one of the primary conditions to get a group to work collaboratively in flow, where you have this downregulation of ego and this upregulation of creativity and imagination, is exactly as you said, is a clear purpose. Like, what are we doing here? And we have this collective understanding of this is why we're coming together and what we're trying to achieve together. That's the first thing that we need. The second thing we need in that context is the ability to speak freely. So having that really strong psychological safety where it's okay to share an idea or to challenge the status quo or to be contrarian. And that's completely encouraged. So collaboration, creativity, to the big kahunas in terms of skills for the future. And the third one is...
I want to just really quickly, how, again, to come back to your first shift, right? So collaboration, any tips for leaders to fuel collaboration in the hub setting? Obviously, it's a little easier said than done when it comes, no, not easier said than done. It's easier to facilitate in the headquarters model, but in a hub model, how might we fuel collaboration as a leader?
The same principles apply. So everything that we just spoke about in terms of having a common purpose, understanding where each other's coming from, having a deep understanding of each other's skills, abilities, and how we like to learn and express ourselves, all that stays the same. The principles of yes and, which is a improv technique which applies to creativity and collaboration, is really useful. Technically, it's about your platform and how you're engaging with it. So you might use any sort of web-based platform where you can actually in real time add ideas and tease it out. That's really important, like the technology platform, so that people can actually get on together and play with different ideas. And there's all sorts of emerging ones at the moment. There's Miro, there's stuff, even Zoom has got its own little platform happening where you can do that kind of virtual whiteboarding.
Yeah.
The idea is to build on each other's ideas. That's what collaboration is.
Yes.
And that requires deep attention and listening, whether it's in person or online in a hybrid environment, or even if it's asynchronous. So if it's asynchronous collaboration, and sometimes it has to be because people are on different sides of the planet, how do you apply deep listening if you're not there at the same time? It's coming back to the fundamentals of being curious. What questions can you ask to tease out an understanding of what the other person is proposing and where they're coming from? So it comes back to that fundamental leadership skill applied in a new way, in a different context, which I think will really help tease it out.
I like that you're reiterating that these are not rocket science. This isn't rocket science. These are not skills that are completely foreign to everyone. They are fundamental leadership skills that you likely already have. It's the application of the latter that shifts along with the shifts that we're seeing. And I like how you're just applying them differently and you're going to get a different outcome. Definitely leveraging technology would be huge, and to make sure that you're fueling using it, but also training your people on how to use it is a big one. I feel like a lot of companies, a lot of clients will roll out, the Microsoft Teams or whatever different platform they're using to collaborate and to help kind of people connected, but they fail to train people on how to use it and how to leverage it to increase their connection, to increase their collaboration. What are some of those little known things that this platform does? And again, it's not all on the leader, but find your champion, find that one person who seems to have really kind of hit the ground running with that software, with that platform, and empower them to share with their peers. Maybe even give them a developmental opportunity to prep a little, presentation on little known facts about Teams, and to help them kind of learn how to use it and teach their peers how to use it more to their advantage. So definitely make sure that whatever collaboration platform you are rolling out, please provide the training so that people feel empowered to actually use it, because what we are not comfortable with, we will likely not be using, right?
Oh, I agree. Yeah. In addition to explaining the fundamentals of the technology platform, like the actual skills, I think one of the things that's underutilized or underused by leaders, whether it's face-to-face or virtually, is doing a meta explanation or parameter setting about what we're trying to do. So even just the principles I just explained there, that we're using yes and, we're building on each other's, we're being curious, like sort of setting ground rules and expectations is something that just kind of gets swept aside because people assume that it's obvious. And experienced leaders are very guilty of this. It's like, because they're so used to working in groups, potentially more so than many of their team members, just reiterating what the ground rules and the principles are helps set the right tone and expectation, and reminds people like, oh yeah, that's right. This is how I can show up better and be more present here in this particular setting or in attention to this particular issue that we're trying to solve.
100%.
So doing a bit of meta.
Yeah, of meta. I like that. And when I speak of shared commitments, that's what I'm referring to. Ground rules, I feel like, hey, we're all adults. Nobody wants rules. Shared commitments is like, let's be clear on what the expectations are and how we're going to navigate whatever situation, and what are we going to uphold as we navigate it. Absolutely. So doing a bit of meta, you say? META or Mecca?
Meta, META.
Okay.
We're not being Mecca. But why not? I'm sure we could build that into the premise somehow.
Yeah, I like that. So, okay, just to bring us back to the 4 shifts. We talked about headquarters to hubs, knowledge to creativity. What are the other 2 shifts?
Okay, so for the workers, it's going from doer to creator.
Yes.
So that's in line with the shift in work, doer to creator. And the 4th one is worldview. And this is kind of a big one. So there's a shift. There's actually, is it a shift happening? There is a shift, and there's also a tug of war around it. So the prominent worldview at the moment is for more. And everything we do talks about what are our targets, what's our growth rate. So more and growth are the current worldview. And there's so many things that are great about that. It's led to progress and innovation and development and new technology. And it's come with a whole bunch of unintended side effects. Oh, climate change, as an example. So the whole extraction approach to business, where we're going to mine resources, whether it's human or earthbound resources, to grow and build more things, is damaging, has some damaging consequences. So the shift in worldview is less about more and growth for more and growth's sake, and more focused on all. What are we doing this for? We're doing it for all humans and the planet. And the whole idea is from Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics, which talks about how can we build an economy, a business, an ecosystem that looks after all the fundamentals for all humans. So things like shelter and food and healthcare and solid well-being, opportunity to pursue one's personal goals. That kind of fundamental ambition should be part of our economic intentions and our business program within the confines of our planetary resources. So the donut is like, how do we get the sweet spot of doing all this for humans within the means of our planet? And so this idea of a global ecology, and the shift is from more and growth to enough for all. And this has got some big ramifications because it's a shift in values. And people don't shift values all that easily, especially if we say this is better than that. People tend to get defensive around their values. And yet the compelling future for all of us is this shift from enough for all. So that is seeing a rise of things like ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues, this idea of being transparent and purposeful in our work, and to integrating this grander purpose in our work, that it's not just about providing services, it's providing service in service to a bigger picture. And this ethical shift is a pretty big one. And it's kind of a leading edge piece as opposed to a default one. And yet it's calling people forward. There's more and more requirement for that. And we see that with the rise of protests around the world that have been emerging for the last 5 or more years. People, because of the technology platforms we have, which allow greater transparency and greater global communication. Hello, social media, for all its ills, has allowed ideas and insights and perspectives to spread throughout the world. Now, some of that's misinformation, and some of it is actually just a window into what the hell's happening. And when people see injustices and unfairness, they tend to get pretty bullshit about it.
Exactly.
So transparency is really helping shift this. And the other technology that's emerging, in addition to things like social media, is blockchain. And blockchain is kind of a sleeper trend that hasn't taken off yet. And all we hear about with regards to blockchain is the cryptocurrency bubbles and boom cycles. And it's less about that. It's more about what that technology can do. And basically, blockchain is recording transactions that cannot be changed and completely visible to all parties. So it's immutable and it's completely transparent. So we can log transactions in our business. We can log, for example, carbon neutral certification of our business can get logged onto the blockchain. We can showcase our business processes like a palm oil business in South America is doing right now. It's got its workers with these Palm Pilots who, when they log into work, it gets recorded on the blockchain. And when they log out, also recorded. So you can see how long an individual worker is actually working, so they're not being exploited. It logs the planting and growth and care of particular palm trees and when they're harvested, so that it can see that there's sound ecological principles being applied to that. It can log satellite pictures of the forests that it's managing. So that's all completely transparent. Now, some businesses do not want that level of transparency in their operations because maybe things aren't so great. But this idea that our transactions and that we can prove what we say we're doing is going to change how people show up, and will probably force the hand in terms of moving this shift in worldview.
And in a good way, though, will increase, to bring this back to our leadership, right? Increase the expectation that leaders also provide that level of transparency. If the organization is providing that level of transparency, then the expectation is that you model the walk, right? So definitely make sure that you're also delivering on that same level of transparency with your team members.
That's right. So when I did some research for my second novel, Terra Blanca, Insurrection, and looking at what is a model of governance we could use in an independent man-made environment. The premise of the book is that climate change has meant that we need to create new habitats. And one of the ways we're going to create new habitats is floating worlds. So man-made floating islands where we can be self-sufficient. How might we govern a community in such an environment? And you can play with these different models, utopian governance models, one of which is technocracy, where you have an elected group of representatives or nominated group of representatives, either elected or like jury duty pulled from the pool. And it's supported. And it's supported with technology, for example, artificial intelligence that can help them make better decisions. And so in that collective environment is a way to start making transparent all the decisions. So you combine the technocracy with blockchain. So every decision that the governing group makes gets logged and is visible to all the citizens of the community.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, councils do this, like local councils here in Australia.
Minutes,
they do it with minutes, and some of them have all their meetings recorded.
Yep.
And so people can attend or watch virtually so they can see the transparent process. And yet a lot of work happens before they get into that room knowing that they're being watched. But when it comes to decision making, like everything is recorded. Yeah. And that makes you think a little bit harder about the decisions that you're making and the positions that you're taking.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Amazing stuff. I'm really happy that we were able to get the second episode in the books. And so we can share those 4 shifts that are happening and impacting the world of work. Just for our listeners' benefit, we're talking about headquarters to hubs. We're talking about knowledge to creativity. We're talking to creator. That's right. Doers to creator. Doer to creator. And last but not least,
is growth and more to enough for all.
There you go. Awesome. And so you have alluded to the top skills, if you will, that need to be repurposed. Same fundamental skills. We've been saying this the entire episode, but repurposed. Can we just remind folks what those different skills are and how what they are and how they need to be repurposed? So,
okay. 3 C's. Creativity is the first one. And that's all about asking better questions and being curious. The second one is collaboration. It's how can we build something better together? And that means down regulating ego and up regulating curiosity. So creativity and collaboration go hand in hand. And the third one is compassion. And compassion is an enduring leadership quality, and it's an enduring leadership practice. The new context for it is your sphere of concern. And that goes hand in hand with the shift in worldview, in terms of growth and more, where our sphere of concern was really for our own organization. And that's about it. Where the new sphere of concern is all about a global context, community. How big is your sphere of concern? And what kind of ripple effect are you having? So you're making decisions and considerations from that ripple effect point of view. And I think it's one of the exercises I like to do is asking leaders, where does your current circle of compassion cut out? Like you care about yourself, you care about your family. Do you care about your team? What about your whole organization? What about your industry? What about your nation? What about your ecosystem planet? What about bigger universe? Yeah. So, where do you go? Like when people have different levels of compassion, and there's lots of different reasons for that. One is how much resources do they have and energy do they have to apply to the different circles of concern. If you have a lot going on in your personal world, let's say you're battling a significant disease, maybe your circle of concern is like this big.
Right there.
And that needs to be the case. Otherwise, if there's no you, doesn't matter about your concern for anything else. So you need to look after self always. So it's a healthy, important thing to care for self, healthy, important thing to care for family, because you have a family that's going pear-shaped, then your ripple effect is going to be negative anyway. So it's not like this or that, it's like this and that and that. And so when we build the skills and resources to look after ourselves, to look after our family, to look after our team, and we're kind of building our capability and reach this way, then we can start to expand outwards. And we're going to need leaders who are solid in all of those, and so they can continue to have a positive ripple effect globally and into space, really, because now that's becoming the outreaches of what we're doing as humans as well. So yeah, our compassion will need to expand. And alongside of that is all about how we're actually caring through our expression of compassion. That we don't fry ourselves in the meantime.
Yes, absolutely. Love the 3 C's. I was wondering what that third C was, because I know we had absolutely touched on creativity and collaboration. And when we left off on that final shift, we hadn't quite touched on compassion. So thank you for touching on that. We are absolutely over time, which doesn't surprise me. We tend to do that last time as well, but it's great. I think it's really valuable information. We've not touched on your book. So really quickly, I'd love for you to share your 2 books. And the last episode, you touched quite a bit on people stuff. So maybe this time you talk about that second book that you alluded to. And for those who want to know more about people stuff, you'll just have to go listen to the first episode with Zoe.
People stuff, it's got lots of technical skills and how-tos on how to do some of this bigger picture leadership thinking. My first novel and my 5th book is The Olympus Project. It's actually a leadership book in fiction disguise. So it's not a parable. Like we were talking about Patrick Lencioni before, who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is a story about a CEO goes into a dysfunctional organization, does a transformation project with very clear leadership takeaways. This is a broader fictional story, and it does touch on different leadership concepts. And the premise here is that Xanthi Waters is heading up a team to put a pitch together to build the first community on the moon. And so the questions are, how do you do that? How do you pick your team? What kind of skills and abilities and attitudes do you need to bring to the table to create that, to work under pressure in such a limited environment? What are the issues that might come up when you're living together, just 6 of you, and still being accountable to a greater community? And what's their interest? And how do you actually build a community within a greater global context, which has got different agendas? And so there's some very pragmatic themes in terms of a leader and their team, as well as in a global context of what are the shifting paradigms that we need to navigate. And this book actually just found out won a gold medal at Readers' Favorites Awards. So I'm very happy about that. Yeah.
That's exciting. And it sounds like we've all contended with an Olympus project of sorts, right? Whatever the scale at work. So it sounds like a lot. We were talking offline earlier, and I was saying that I really love having a bit of a story to go along with these tidbits of learning. So it sounds like that might be a perfect fit for what I like to read. So I'm definitely going to be picking it up. If listeners would like to continue connecting with you, reach out. They want to find out more about your books, about Zoë. How can they do that?
All right. You can come to my planet, zoerouth.com. It's kind of like the centerpiece. Or you can find me on any of the socials. And if you're a listener and you like podcasts, you can come over to my show, the Zoë Routh Leadership Podcast. It's Routh like mouth with an R.
I love it. Routh like mouth with an R. Listeners, check her out. Definitely listen in on her podcast. She is such an insightful speaker. She really knows her stuff. We always love having her. Zoë, one last nugget that you want to leave, if in one sentence or 2, maybe you want to leave with one nugget of wisdom to help our leaders navigate the future of work, what would that be?
Perspective is power. So the more we see, the better we lead. So get curious and start looking more deeper, more broadly, more wide in what you're considering for your leadership journey.
Awesome. I love it. Perspective is absolutely power. Listeners, that's it for us this week. Please do take the time to reflect on all this amazing information that was just shared with you. And from it, I challenge you to pick one thing that you will commit to taking action on, then go out there and get it done. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guest, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.